I like cookies.
Yes.
I don't like all cookies equally.
No, I agree.
And there are some cookies that I would just rather not eat.
I agree.
But I would never say I don't like cookies.
And
like, you know what I mean?
right.
So, like, I guess I can't say I don't like buffets if there's one buffet in the world I can go to. But I think you can do that. I don't know. So.
But yet, if someone said, I just don't like any cookies, I wouldn't tell them they're wrong. Welcome to TBC Extra, a weekly podcast of our Sunday sermon and a little extra. I am Teresa Jenkins, the communications director here at Topeka Bible Church.
And I'm Jason Brent, the children's pastor at Topeka Bible Church, and we're glad you're here. And now for a little extra.
Hi, welcome to another week of TBC Extra. We've got super producer Alan here, and as usual, Jason. Glad you guys
I didn't know we weren't talking. Alan just waves.
Am I going to be the only one talking?
Only hand gestures.
Next time, Alan and I will. Yeah, well, okay. We'll have to come up with a game there that way. Yeah. How's it going?
Listeners are going to love us if we do that.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So we had staff meeting this morning, as we usually do on Tuesdays.
Oh, did we ever?
And wow, did you all miss out? So we're going to let you peek behind the curtain. And if you don't care how the sausage gets made, fast forward to the sermon. We're completely not offended by that. So we always have a question that Connor starts the conversations with, and we go around the room.
Yeah,
an icebreaker question. And today's this wasn't even the question.
No, he just said, let's just throw this out here. Yeah,
somehow we got talking about buffets.
Yeah, how did we get it on the topic of buffets?
Yeah, it eventually became the question, but it was not originally.
He decided to make it the question.
Was it Patty say something maybe?
I don't know.
About buffets or avoiding buffets?
Somebody said something, and boy, it got
heated.
Pretty heated. It was.
Yes. Well, I didn't think of having the question, do you like buffets or not? I thought that was a pretty clear cut.
Yes.
Clear-cut opinion, optional, no right or wrong answer question, but I was mistaken on that.
So,
I guess.
So, what was your answer?
Everyone's answer was yes, we liked buffets. Only we like to pick and choose which buffet. Yes, asterisk. Like maybe some people like cruise buffets, or some people like Hoo Hop, but not Golden Corral or that kind of thing. So I was going to wholeheartedly say, yes, I like buffets, but, and I do think it's an age thing, because when I was 20, whatever buffet, CC's, macaroni and cheese pizza, all day, right. 12, 15 pieces of pizza, easy. I should not eat like that ever, but I really should not eat like that now, and I pay for it later. So when I got to me, I was the last one that went around, and I had to admit, there's only a few buffet places that I would really enjoy eating right now in my life as it sits now.
I came out pretty strong early on.
You really did. You were like a no buffet. But when we go on our cruise, we're going to have a buffet and I'm going to enjoy it.
Yeah.
But there's various reasons why you would want to avoid a buffet or not, and we kind of covered the gamut there.
Yeah, the health and germs.
Someone sneezing in your food. I don't think anyone. I don't think even Connor probably doesn't want sneezed in food.
I don't think anybody.
Yeah, I don't think so. Maybe he does because he really likes the buffet. I
thought I made a fair statement. When it came back around to me.
Teresa, all your statements are fair. They're always tempered and balanced. They really are.
I think we can all agree that food is subjective, and Connor's eyes were like, nope, wrong, false.
I think that if we would have started the conversation with, hey, can we agree that all the type of food we like is somewhat subjective? I think the answer would have been yes all the way around. But by that time, it was like, no, food is not subjective. You have to like this kind of food.
And what was your comment, Alan?
Once I went around to the room,
you were very quiet during all of the back and forth.
You like Amish buffets? I've never been to an Amish buffet.
That's what it came around to. Was I'd had experiences with buffets that are your typical CC's Pizza, your Golden Corral type of things, and I don't know. You come away from it, and I get pretty disgusted.
Yeah.
Chinese buffets and Japanese buffets, I felt a little bit better about because I don't know. I just like the options because they're very unique compared to other places. But going to Amish buffets changed my whole mind, where it's like buffets can be done right, but the buffet style in restaurants gets really sloppy. And partially the reason, because I did research before the podcast, crazy enough. The reason for buffets, the reason for buffets, from what I could gather, is to operate with a skeleton crew of chefs.
Sure.
Right.
And that way, the customer is more obligated to serving himself. You don't have to pay as much
wait. You don't have to wait for your food, though. You can have your fill of food for sure.
Yes.
There's benefits of a buffet idea.
So economically, it has its reasons for that, but that can lead to a ill-maintained station of food.
Yeah.
Which leads to the germs and gross stuff.
Yeah, hands off when it comes to your food. Yeah, just sitting there are lots of things that could go wrong, I guess.
Yes.
But yeah.
I don't enjoy buffets when the point is to get as much economical food out there as possible so that people can really get filled up and make the most of their money.
Yeah.
For me, I just enjoy food, and because I do, I guess I want it to be more quality. So that when you said,
do you feel like, so
I'm
this is something that I won't ask when Connor's here, but do you feel like when you hear buffet, you automatically think it's going to be a lesser quality? And
that is why I had the very strong reaction when Connor or whoever first brought it up.
Because we said sanitary reasons why, like you said, if the food sits there, it could become unhealthy. People touch it or they'll gross. No one wants that. No one thinks that's a little thing.
Unless it's an exception, like the Amish buffets that Alan mentioned, they probably aren't putting the kind of care into creating that dish, so it is a really good
so we had the sanitary reasons, the quality was reasons why we didn't like, and then just the healthiness of,
Patty,
you feel like you have to eat more and more and more.
Patty brought up that you have this sense of, I need to get my fill and my money's worth, which leads to eating more food than you really need.
And when it's a $17
no taking anything home.
Yeah, you can't take the leftovers home.
Yeah, and I rarely have leftovers at a restaurant, so that was not a good point for me. But
I'd rather spend $25 for a meal for one, and have the option of leftovers and have that food be really delicious.
Sure.
And I don't mind saying that I like being waited on, because we only eat out once a week. And I know for some folks, that's 4 times more a month than we do.
Sure.
But in our past life, it was more frequent. And now it's just once a week. We try to make it
a good place to go.
So I'm not going to go to Golden Corral.
Yeah.
Or CC's. When I have grandchildren someday, we'll go to CC's. I mean, that'll just
for
be
them.
My school fundraisers were always at CC's.
Because kids love it. Yeah, little kids love it. There's a time and place for it. Yeah. And there's a time and place.
And salad bars are buffets. So,
yes.
Right? I mean, so hopefully so I guess the question is out there for all you. Do you support buffets?
We do want to know.
Do you like buffets? Do you avoid buffets? Or do you pick and choose? Like, I guess was kind of, I feel like the general consensus of most of our staff was that, well, this kind of buffet is okay, but this one probably not.
Yeah, we even included potlucks at one point as potentially a buffet.
Well, once we went there, we had to go to cruise ship buffets too.
I like cookies.
Yes.
I don't like all cookies equally.
No, I agree.
And there are some cookies that I would just rather not eat.
I agree.
But I would never say I don't like cookies. And you know what I mean? Right. So I guess I can't say I don't like buffets if there's one buffet in the world I can go to. But I think you can do that. I don't know. So
But yet if someone said, I just don't like any cookies, I wouldn't tell them they're wrong. And that's how I felt this morning.
Well, we're not going to tell you you're wrong, but we would like to know if you like buffets or not.
We would. Even if you're from out of our area, go ahead and tell us where's
a good buffet. Maybe we'll change our minds forever on buffets.
We can have a buffet road trip. That sounds dangerous. Let's have a totally jarring transition, because I can't think of anything.
That's fine.
Smooth.
Well, this sermon was definitely not potluck.
It was not.
It was personally crafted.
You got to eat on the right side of the buffet line.
There you go.
Let's give it a listen.
Good to be with you. So, thank you. So, tale as old as time, right? You've been a part of a group project where not everybody pulled their weight, right? And the person who didn't pull their weight comes along at the very end when it's time for the boss to look at it or the teacher to look at it, and they want all the credit, right? So when I was at K-State, my major was family studies, and that was like all we did was group projects. And I got so tired of that happening that one time I went up and asked the teacher if I could just do an entire group project by myself. And that was a really dumb idea, but did I have anybody in my group who slacked off? I did not. So I guess I got what I wanted. You know, there's a part of our brain that just kind of short circuits when we are all supposed to be moving towards kind of this common goal together, and we just see people sort of flagging off to the sides and not carrying their weight is really one way to put it. And there's a story in the Bible that relates very much to that. In Numbers chapter 32, we only have 2 weeks, including today, left, 2 lessons in the book of Numbers. And this is our second to last message. And you're going to find that even though the circumstances in Numbers 32 are going to be completely foreign to you, the situation that we find ourselves in, or the nation of Israel found themselves in, rather, is one that directly relates to something that we're going through today. So if you turn to Numbers 32, you are going to get all of those feelings about your group project frustrations are going to come out here. So it kind of set you up for where we're at, right? In chapter 31, last week, Israel defeated the forces of Midian. Right, we talked about what it means to kind of have this holy war and how it's not just a battle against flesh and blood, but that God is working out this much greater thing against the forces of evil, okay? And so what we should be expecting, because if you might remember, we're in the plains of Moab, which is right on the east side of the Jordan River. Right? The Jordan River runs north to south, and over on the east side, Israel's waiting to go in to the west side, and they are going to be taking on the conquest, really, of the Promised Land. They're going to attack the land of Canaan, but right now, they're in these plains. And while they're there, awaiting the instruction to cross the Jordan River and to begin really the full-on military battle, the war that God has called them to, they find themselves in a beautiful piece of land called Gilead, okay? And so that's what you need to know as we begin in chapter 32. Now, the people of Reuben and the people of Gad, those are 2 tribes of Israel, had a very great number of livestock. And they saw the land of Jazer and the land of Gilead, and behold, the place was a place for livestock. So the people of Gad and the people of Reuben came and said to Moses and to Eleazar the priest and to the chiefs of the congregation, the land that the Lord struck down before the congregation of Israel is a land for livestock, and your servants, we have livestock. And they said, if we have found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants for a possession. Do not take us across the Jordan. Okay, so we have 2 tribes listed here, Reuben and Gad, and then later on we find out that there's a half tribe. There's half of the tribe of Manasseh that's also with them. So it's like 2.5 tribes. And so they go to Moses and they say, it's pretty great here. And we've been wandering for 40 years in a desert filled with snakes, and there is no desert and there are no snakes here in Gilead. And we'd like to just hang out right here. We've got livestock. We've got a lot of it because of the battles that we've waged up until this point. And so we'd like to hang out here. Now, their claim there at face value makes sense, right? Ultimately, God is taking them to the Promised Land, and they've found land that they really love, and they want to stay in it. The difficulty, though, is we're about to find out, is that what they are really doing is they're asking to opt out of God's critical mission for the entire nation of Israel, which was to cross the Jordan and take over the Promised Land, right? That's what we have been leading towards this entire time, is the whole nation is going to go up. And you might remember in chapter 31, right? Each one of the 12 tribes gives 1,000 people into the war, right? Because everybody is united in what they're supposed to be doing here. Well, Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh say, can we just like hang back? Like, can we just foam finger like, go on, like cheer you because we're for you and what you're doing, but let's stay in Gilead. And so what they're asking is what ultimately ends up happening is you'll see that they're going to be divided. This red line here is the Jordan River. It goes from the Sea of Galilee down, right? And they are going to stay on the east side. The promised land is this, over here. What is not the promised land is this section right here. And so behind their request to stay on the east side of the Jordan is not only a request that goes against God's desire for them, right? He has an inheritance for them within the promised land, but also that they are going to ask that they not be involved in the war that Israel is supposed to be going forward with. So let's see what Moses has to say to this request. But Moses said to the people of Gad and to the people of Reuben, "Shall your brothers go to war? Will you sit here? Why will you discourage the heart of the people of Israel from going over into the land that the Lord has given them? Your fathers did this when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. For when they went up to the valley of Eshcol and saw the land, they discouraged the heart of the people of Israel from going into the land that the Lord had given them." So Kadesh Barnea is like shorthand for Numbers 13 and 14 when the spies are sent, right? And the 12 come back and 10 of them have a bad report and they don't by faith go into the promised land when they were supposed to. And so God makes them wander for 40 years, right? And so Moses is equating what these tribes want to do with the most significant rebellion against God while they were in the desert. That really, frankly, caused them to wander in the desert. So, high stakes. As he goes on in verse 13, and he says, all these things brought the Lord's anger, and it was kindled against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness 40 years, until all the generation that had done evil in the sight of the Lord was gone. And behold, you have risen in your father's place, a brood of sinful men, to increase still more the fierce anger of the Lord against Israel. For if you turn away from following him, he will again abandon them in the wilderness, and you will destroy all this people. So you could say that Moses does not like their plan, right? So what he's saying here, like why does he have such an intense response? Okay, well, again, we have to think back to the rejection from the promised land, originally in Numbers 13 and 14. And what that came down to was a people who did not have faith that they could trust in the plans of God, right? They said, remember, you might recall there was a period in our series in Numbers when we were just talking about all the accusations they were leveling against him. They're like, you're going to kill us. You're going to kill our children. You're going to do all these terrible things. You hate us. You want us to die of thirst and starvation. And that was the generation of people that got sent out of the promised land. They were supposed to go into it, and God said no. And Moses is saying to Reuben and Gad and Manasseh, he's like, you're doing the exact same thing. You're doing the exact same thing, which is looking into the promised land and saying, we don't want to go there. And the problem is that, well, there are 4 problems really with their request. One is that it's going to undermine Israel's unity, okay? So everything they do is supposed to be as a group. 1,000 troops from each tribe are going into war. Everything is what Israel is doing. And all 12 tribes are a part of that. And so they're going to undermine this by leaving a significant portion of God's nation on the outside of the promised land. That's a big deal. Second, they're going to fracture their military, okay? This goes back to the census, the second census in Numbers 26, but they're leaving between a fifth, 20%, and 25% of Israel's military on the outside, okay, before they're going to war. Third, they're going to discourage the other tribes. You're like, well, what's the big deal about discouraging them? Well, kind of the whole book of Numbers has been building up to, we're going into the promised land, and it's going to be war. And if you're the other, what would that be, 9.5 tribes, and you see 2.5 who are just like drinking Mai Tais at the top of the hills of Gilead while you go on across the Jordan into war, like, That's not the most encouraging. That's not the send-off you're looking for. We're supposed to be united in this effort to go forward. And so when our brothers who are supposed to be going to war are sitting on the sidelines, like, oh, well, now it doesn't feel like we're really going forward with all of our strength. But fourth and finally, and this is the most significant, is they're angering God with their rebellion, right? What they are doing, make no mistake, is they are telling God, we have made a new plan, and that plan we want to now be your plan. We want our plan to be God's new plan for the world. Well, that's not really how God works. God has a plan, and in fact, he has a critical mission for Israel to be going on. One that is going to bring forth later on down the road, the salvation of the world through Jesus Christ. All of that is wrapped up in God saying, we're going to go into the promised land. Not to mention all of the things that he was being faithful to keep his word on that he had promised to Father Abraham. So anyhow, you take all of these things, right? And so Moses gives them this response. He says, you shouldn't do this. This is terrible. This is really bad. You're in danger. Your action is endangering the entire nation of being sent out of the promised land once again. And so they come back with a compromise. They came near to him and said, we will build sheepfolds here for our livestock and cities for our little ones, but we will take up arms, ready to go before the people of Israel until we have brought them to their place. And our little ones shall live in the fortified cities because of the inhabitants of the land. We will not return to our homes until each of the people of Israel has gained his inheritance. For we will not inherit with them on the other side of the Jordan and beyond, because our inheritance has come to us on this side of the Jordan to the east. Okay? So there are a couple significant things here to look at really quick. One is, what they're doing, right, is most definitely a compromise. And they're trying to make a deal, right, with Moses, who is really speaking on behalf of God. And they say, hey, God, how about you get our military, and then we get to keep all the land that we would really like. And if we do that, it seems like it's solving enough of the problems that you brought up that we should be okay. What's sad, though, is we already see that their heart, and this is going to be a significant problem, really, even though they're making this compromise to send their army and to technically do what they're supposed to be doing, their heart is divided. It is literally split over the waters of the Jordan, right? Because what they say here is they're like, okay, all of this beautiful land in Gilead, okay, all these cities, all of these places that are great for our livestock, we're going to leave our women and children there, okay? And in fact, they're a lot of dangerous nations around here, around all this land. And so we're going to leave them in these fortified cities. But yeah, we'll go with you. We'll go with you into the land, God's critical mission. We'll carry it out. But they begin to speak about the land east of the Jordan as their inheritance. And that is not the way that God speaks about it. God says, I had a plan for you to go into the promised land. And they say, yeah, but we like what we see right now. And so instead of by faith going into, by faith expecting that the promise of God that they would be inheriting was better, instead they looked at what they had immediately before them and said, in this case, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, right? We'd take what we would have right now. So they bring this compromise, and Moses consents. In fact, he makes a little covenant with them. He says, if you'll do this, if you will take up arms to go before the Lord for the war, and every armed man of you will pass over the Jordan before the Lord until he has driven out his enemies from before him, and the land is subdued before the Lord, then after that you shall return and be free of obligation to the Lord and to Israel, and this land shall be your possession before the Lord. But if you will not do so, behold, you have sinned against the Lord, and be sure that your sin will find you out. So I want you to notice here what Moses is doing. And the way that he's speaking about this, he is lifting up the situation beyond the interactions of brothers and sisters in Israel. He is saying along the way, hey, this plan is before the Lord. this war. And every armed man of you, this is going to be the condition of this covenant, every armed man will go forward before the Lord until he's accomplished God's critical mission, that it's subdued before the Lord. And then after that, you shall return to the land east of the Jordan, and to this land shall be your possession before the Lord. But if you will not do so, behold, you have sinned against the Lord. And so he's saying, really, your request, your compromise, your decision to be split in half and have your priority, really focus on your priorities over and above the unity and the military campaign here of Israel. He says, the decision that you're making is going up to the throne room of God here. It's like, this is not just a mediation, okay, of how and who gets what land and what parcel. He says this is going up to the plans of God. And that is so significant. And what he also is reminding them of is he's like, remember, this war, this is not about you. This war is about driving out God's enemies. That was last week in chapter 31. This war is about more than just you, but you have made it really about you. You don't want to go forward, you want to stay behind. So I think a good question right now would be, what's the big deal, right? What's the big deal? And especially if this is like your first Sunday and you haven't been going with us through the book of Numbers, then a lot of this probably doesn't make all that much sense. So what you should be picking up on at this point is the fact that these 2.5 tribes, they have taken God's plan and rejected it. They have made a new plan and asked God to make that his plan. And in so doing, their hearts have been divided, as I've already said, and their priorities have been split, and they are now technically doing the bare minimum of what they have been asked to do, but meanwhile, they are trying to keep the here and now, the Gilead, the beautiful, the thing that they think is best for them. That's going to be a problem. So, back to the story. Moses finishes with one last phrase, right? He says, and be sure that your sin will find you out. If you're not familiar with the Bible, you might have even heard that phrase. It's pretty popular. Your sin will find you out. And what Moses is saying is that let no one be mistaken, Reuben, Gad, half of Manasseh, because this is before the Lord. Do not think that you can sort of skirt this compromise, right? That you can just get by on a loophole. He says, no, if you fail to carry this out, he's like, it might not be right away, it might not be the next year, but eventually your rebellion is going to catch up with you. That's true for us today as well. So at this point, we leave Numbers 32, and we follow the story, and we pick up on it when they are crossing the Jordan. In the book of Joshua, in chapter 4, our question here, right, is Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh going to be faithful to the promise that they have made to God that they would send all their men? The sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh passed over armed before the people of Israel, as Moses had told them. About 40,000 ready for war passed over before the Lord for battle to the plains of Jericho. Okay, so the book of Joshua is where we cover most of the conquest of the promised land. And in Joshua 4, they're crossing the Jordan. Huge event in terms of the history of Israel. That is the sort of border that they have been waiting to go over into the promised land. That is the thing that God has been holding them back from, and now they are crossing. And who crosses the Jordan first? The 2.5 tribes that didn't want to cross it at all, right? Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh, they go over first. Interesting, though, they are the only tribes in this longer section in Joshua 4 where we're told how many of them went over. And that begs the question, why? Why is God telling us how many of them actually went over and not any of the other tribes? Well, remember Moses said every single one of your men is supposed to go over for war. And you might remember that Reuben and Gad and Manasseh said, we are going to take the land that has, been war-torn and ravaged by raiding nomadic groups for history, because we're not the only people that recognize that this is nice land. And we're going to leave our women and children there, and so they need to be protected. So if you go to the census in Numbers 26, 40,000 means that they left 70,000 behind east of the Jordan. 40,000 means they left 70,000 behind east of the Jordan. Did they give all of their military men to God's purposes? No. They gave basically the minimum number that was required so that people wouldn't question whether they were sending anybody at all. 40,000 go over, 70,000 stay behind to refrain from carrying out God's critical mission. Last thing about Gad and Reuben and Manasseh. What happens to them after this point? So Joshua 22, they finished the conquest. Those 40,000 who went over into the promised land did a really good job. In fact, Joshua, the leader, right, the one who took over from Moses, at the beginning of chapter 22, he says, go back to your land east of the Jordan, the inheritance that you've asked for. He says, and be blessed because you have done what you said you would do. Kind of. And so we see them cross over east of the Jordan into their inheritance. But as they're doing it, those who are still in Israel, the other 9.5 tribes, they say, hey, just so you know, if you haven't figured it out already, you're leaving the promised land. You're choosing to go outside of God's promise. And if you would still like to go back and take possession amongst your brothers and sisters in Israel and not go to the east side of the Jordan, you can still do it. And the leaders of the tribes, they say, no, we're going to go back to Gilead. So what happens to them while they're in Gilead? Well, they have a really rough time, to be honest with you. They picked a land that was beautiful, and they were not the only ones who noticed that it was beautiful. And for the rest of the Old Testament, Reuben and Gad and Manasseh are attacked constantly, all the time. The thing they sought to avoid, going to war, is the thing that they ended up bringing to their doorstep, the whole bit. So we find there's this huge stone that hangs out with the Mona Lisa at the Louvre. It's called the Moabite stone. And it was found about 550 years after the events of Numbers 32. And you might recall that the Moabites do not like Israel. Okay? It's called the Mesha stele because Mesha was the king who wrote it. Written on line 3, it says, Omri was the king of Israel, 1 Kings 16, and he oppressed Moab for many days, for Chemosh was angry with his land. Chemosh would be a false god that pops up throughout the Old Testament, and it's who the Moabites worshipped, one of their many gods. Excuse me. And his son Ahab succeeded him, and he said, he too, I will oppress Moab. In my days he did so, but I looked down on him and on his house, and Israel has gone to ruin. Yes, it has gone to ruin forever. What is he talking about? Well, the land that Reuben and Gad and half of Manasseh chose for themselves was conquered over and over and over again by the surrounding nations. And at this point, in 1 Kings 16, it was occupied not by Israelites, but by the Moabites. And so they're saying that Ahab went to go and reconquer and liberate the Moabite land and bring it back over to Israel. But then the king, this King Mesha, right, he says, Israel has gone to ruin. Yes, it has gone to ruin forever, because what did he do? Well, he goes and takes it back. And the men of Gad, we know them, lived in the land of Adaroth. That's one of the cities they claim for themselves in Numbers 32. From ancient times, and the king of Israel built Adaroth for himself, and I fought against the city, and I captured, and I killed all the people from the city as a sacrifice for our false god Chemosh and for Moab. Okay, so they did not have a good time in Gilead. They did not get what they were looking for. They thought that they were finding their plan was going to be better than God's. In reality, it was far worse. And because of that, they experienced the difficulties of their own decision, right? And frankly, that's kind of the end of the narrative. In fact, the tribe of Reuben basically altogether disappears from the Bible because they were their numbers had dwindled so far down. And ultimately, we don't hear any more about these tribes after the nation of Assyria comes in, and the first nation, or the first groups of people who are taken off into slavery to Assyria when they are deported as slaves, are those who are east of the Jordan. 10 to 15 years later, the nation of Assyria comes and takes over the rest of the northern kingdom. So if you've fallen asleep already, what I'm trying to tell you is that it did not work out very well. And it did not work out very well for reasons that we are familiar with, because they rejected the promises of God. In fact, they made a great error. They were desiring to abandon their fellow believers in carrying out God's critical mission. This was the problem. And even though they'd sent some of their fighting men, that did not mean that their heart was in what they were trying to do. That did not mean that they were committed, quite obviously, and it did not mean that the plan that they had chosen instead of God's was going to bring success. And so if you are somebody who cares about what the Bible says, then the question you should now be asking is, okay, what does this mean for me? Because we're not a theocracy. We are not divided up into tribes. We are not the nation of Israel. We're not going on a holy war, okay? But what we do have to ask ourselves is, what is God's critical mission for us today? Is there something in the Bible where every single person is supposed to be a part of it, just like ancient Israel was supposed to entirely be united by God's plan? Yep. Matthew 28:19 and 20. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. It's called the Great Commission. Jesus was crucified. He rose again, hung out for 40 days. And as he was about to leave and ascend to heaven, he says, one more thing. Here's what y'all are supposed to do while I'm gone. And he says, go therefore and make disciples of all nations. In order to make a disciple, it means that you have to share the gospel with them. And it means that that gospel takes root by the power of the Holy Spirit. And you don't just leave, you continue to develop and raise up disciples who will then go on and share the gospel with other people. Jesus says this is going to be the battle plan moving forward. No longer are you fighting holy wars with swords, you're fighting them with the word of God and the gospel. This is how spiritual warfare is going to be conducted now, is everybody who is a Christian, who has believed in Jesus Christ, is being called into this great, amazing, holy mission of God called the Great Commission. And through that, it is the one all-encompassing fact for every Christian is that they are supposed to participate in the Great Commission. The problem then is, why do we act so often like Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh? Why do we commit the great error? Because often we abandon our fellow believers in carrying out God's critical mission. We do this in two ways. The first way is that we often want to just simply be exempted from the critical mission. We are like the leaders of the old tribes who said, hey, Moses, can we just not go across the Jordan with you? Like, hey, we're back here. We got our foam finger. We're fans. We're rooting for you, praying for you that you will do well, but we don't want to fight. And there are a lot of reasons why we might want to be exempted, but human nature would tell us it's basically the same reason that they had, which is they found something that they liked better than God's plan. And for Reuben and for Gad and for half of Manasseh, they said, we're big fans of Gilead. We'd like to stay here while you go on and do your thing. And what that looks like for us is we pick and choose things and add things to our life. We choose the present over what is in the future. And we tack on all of this baggage to our lives so that we're really unable to carry out the mission that God has called us to be a part of. We step back. We choose not to engage. And we do so, or I should say, when we do so, we also fall into one of the great problems that Moses addressed, which is that it is discouraging for our brothers and sisters in Christ when we say, hey, we're a fan of the Great Commission, but that's for everybody else to take care of, not me. I'm going to step back over here. It's discouraging because we're all supposed to be united in this mission. And you and I both know when we are united in a mission, it becomes a lot easier to carry it out because we're surrounded by people who are committed to the same thing, who are dedicated to the same purpose, and who have their eyes set on the same goal. It's real hard when somebody comes along at the end of the group project and says, I didn't come to any of the meetings. Can I still get a good grade? And you say, not if I have anything to say about it. That's what I said. We run into a problem because we often want to be exempted. And some of us, frankly, are not involved in the Great Commission at all. But there are many of us, too, who also then take the next step, which is what Reuben and Gad and half of Manasseh did. They want to compromise. And they say, okay, what is the bare minimum? What is the least amount that we could do so that the surrounding tribes don't get fussy with us, right? They set the bar as low as it could possibly go, and then they cleared that bar. God said, send every single person. And they said, how about we leave 70,000 behind? And when that happens too, what we don't realize is that as we are doing this bare minimum, as we are doing, just enough to get by so that we don't feel guilty, we don't realize we are slowly drifting out to sea and away from God's purposes, right? You say, well, hey, I go to church once a month. I dropped $20 in the plate. I prayed for the people who were at Camp Catapult. I listened to Caleb on the radio. I think I've done enough so that Connor isn't going to ask me if I could lead a small group, right? I think I've done enough so that nobody's going to talk with me. But what you don't realize is as you are doing this, you're doing the exact same thing as those tribes, right? Your heart is split. It is not fully committed to God's purposes. With your mouth, you might be saying that you are committed, but with your actions, really what is shown is that we've put forward 40,000 and left 70,000 behind. And as I said, when we do that, what you find is like those tribes who then settled in the east, who said, hey, we're still a part of Israel. We know what's going on. Like, we love them. We're still a part of the nation. When those raiding parties come, and for us, when life gets really hard, we realize that we're not actually as close to God as we were thinking we were, because we weren't a part of his critical mission. So you say, how can I fix the great error? I desire to abandon fellow believers in carrying out God's critical mission, or maybe my language wouldn't be that strong. I just don't want to be a part of it myself, or I want to do as little as possible without feeling like I've failed. The great truth is that we're all called to participate in God's kingdom, and by faith we trust that what is coming is better than what is here now. Those 9.5 tribes that went in and crossed the Jordan, who were willing to cross the Jordan in the first place, they didn't know what their inheritance was going to be. God had said, I've prepared something for you. And they said, that's good enough. We trust that the God who has provided for us and who has been faithful to us and who has never, ever let us down and who has been exceedingly merciful and gracious to us, we're going to bet all of our chips on the fact that he is going to do good by us for carrying out his mission. And the problem is that what the other tribes did is they said, we love what's here and now. We love what we can see. And what the Bible tells us over and over and over again is it's not about what you can see. It's about faith and having hope for the future, right? If everything was about what we can see, then we would all live these very short-sighted lives where we were concerned most of all with our immediate gratification and satisfaction. Right? We would do exactly what we always want to do, but what shortcuts and undermines our ability to have faith and work towards something that is much greater than all of us individually. Right? Like we have to get that we are all a part of something that is much, much bigger than our individual lives. God has called us into this great plan, divine plan for the world. And he says, I want you to be a part of it. And I want you to commit to it. And what God tells us is that being a part of that critical mission, right, saying that we're participating in it, it often requires sacrifice. It doesn't always look as exciting or easy as staying in the land of Gilead. But if you take those two pathways to their natural end, one of them leads to a lot of disappointment, and one of them leads to fulfillment in the promises of God. One of them realizes, as the 2.5 tribes did, that all the things they thought were beautiful turned to ash over time because they did not trust in God's promises. And those who are a part of the nation of Israel recognized that their faith, that God was faithful to them, that he honored his promises, and that he walked with them all the way. So I think that what is so difficult about this is that ultimately what I'm asking you is to follow God with your entire heart. And I recognize that that is a long way to go for some of us. Man, that's a long way to go for me. I don't follow God with all of my own heart. I don't think I've left 70,000 troops behind, but I've probably left like 20,000. I don't know, maybe 30. My life does often stay on the east side of the Jordan River. My life does not always follow God over onto the west side into his plans. And because of that, I recognize, and I have seen, as you probably have too, though, that when I have chosen to stay back, it is never really as fulfilling as I think it's going to be, ever. It might be fun for a while, but sometimes you have to say no to those things to say yes to great things. And what God is doing, and I would also say, as a final thought, like some of the things we're saying no to are good things. There's nothing wrong with Reuben saying, this is a great place for our cattle to graze. Okay? That's wise. But there were good places for their cattle to graze in Israel. It's not like Gilead had a monopoly on green grass. And so sometimes we take what is right in front of our face when God wants us to keep moving forward and to sacrifice so that we can be a part of his great plan, because Gilead is never worth it in the end. Ever. It's never worth it in the end. The most fulfilling thing that you will ever experience is getting to the gates of heaven by trusting in Jesus Christ and hearing, well done, good and faithful servant, and knowing that part of that was because you didn't max out this life, but lived for the eternal one. And so in order to hear the well done, good and faithful servant, there are some things in this life that are good. You say, yeah, I'm going to say no to those so I can say yes to something that is great. That is the great truth. And ultimately it's covered in this sort of wild, obscure story about 2.5 tribes not wanting to cross a river. God says, be a part of my plan. I have great things coming. And there are still blessings to be encountered in this life, but they're not as great as the ones coming. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for today. Lord, we know that Gilead wasn't worth the trouble. Oh, it's tempting. Lord, there are a lot of wonderful things about the life that we live now, a lot of things that draw our attention and our time and our treasure away from your mission. But Lord, they are not fulfilling ultimately. God, I pray that you would help us to realize that. Because even though we might know it in our heads, it doesn't always come out in the way we choose to construct our lives. God, I pray that we might be people of the Great Commission, that we would be a church of the Great Commission, that we would be a place, God, where we recognize that sometimes sacrifice is what is required, because the life of ease would not lead us to the promised land. And Lord, we thank you that by your grace and by your faith and by your mercies, Lord, God, you are answering all of the hopes and promises of people who have gone to be with you and who are just a little bit ahead of us. Father, might we hear, well done, good and faithful servant, because we gave up a little bit during this life so that we could live forever with you and carry out your purposes to the best of our abilities, because God, that was a far better use of our effort. God, we love you and we thank you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Welcome back to the studio. We are joined by Connor, and we have agreed to set aside our buffet discussion. So
for the moment, we did not agree. As the referee in between, there's a ceasefire. It's not a temporary reprieve.
All right. Well, Connor, were there some things that you wanted that maybe didn't get into the sermon you wanted to talk about? This was a pretty meaty sermon.
It was, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
they all,
it was.
yeah.
No, I know
Not
what you mean.
comparatively, but
Believe
I mean,
me.
there were a lot of
Yeah, it
ways
is
this went.
hard sometimes when we're trying to track a narrative to include just enough that still allows for us to do application, but not too much where you might be interested in it, but then you sort of like cannibalize your time later on. It's like, oh, we just spent. That actually happened a couple weeks ago when we did the Balak and Balaam thing. I messed up during the first service, and I had practiced reading the whole story and thought I would have enough time. And about halfway through the sermon, I realized I was taking longer to read and there were 2 slides that we didn't even get to that I'd planned. Anyhow, so, when it comes to this story with Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh, so there's, we did do a couple things outside of Numbers because that's kind of where you have to go to see the effects. But a really interesting thing happens, a pretty big and important section of the story. It doesn't change the outcome, but in Joshua 22, so Joshua 22 is what happened, is the story of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh, half of Manasseh, going back across the Jordan. Right, they've finished the campaign. So Joshua 4 was them going in. Joshua 22 is them coming out. And Joshua at the beginning of 22 gives them this like, hey, you've done a great job. Go back to your land, your inheritance. And as those 2.5 tribes are heading back over, they do a really stupid thing, which is while they're still on, if you can kind of picture in the map, right? Jordan runs north to south. They're on the west side still. They erect this gigantic altar, and it says that it's this really like large and imposing, like it was apparently bigger than other altars, and that was a no-no. You weren't supposed to make any other kind of altar, and so the other 9.5 tribes, they hear about this, hear what they're doing, and they come out, and it almost starts a civil war between these tribes because the 9.5 come in. And they're like, what are you doing? You are not supposed to make an altar. You're not supposed to do this.
They didn't get the memo that we don't do this anymore.
Did we not learn anything?
Yeah, they know. They know. And they're like, because, right, the tabernacle is where we're still supposed to be going to do these things. Now, the 2.5 tribes kind of, and it sounds like they were honest in what, it's not like they were lying once they were confronted, but they said, we never intended for this to be a place where we would sacrifice animals, which would be the purpose of an altar.
Yeah.
They said, we want to set it up as a witness. Now, that word is really significant because that's something that culturally the Israelites do quite a bit.
Yes.
They will set
stones
up
of remembrance,
stones, monuments,
right.
altar markers, so that as they are traveling around, and specifically this idea of for future generations, so that they would know what happened. They said, we want this altar to be a witness that we participated in the conquest of Canaan. And so as people are going from west over to the east, they would pass this thing. But what comes about, well, in the 9.5, they're like, okay, there was probably something you could have done besides build an altar, but we get it, right? And so the civil war is resolved because they were about to kill them. They were about to kill the 2.5 because they were supposedly committing apostasy. So anyhow, what is revealed though, and what's significant, is that the 2.5, they show already, even though the conquest just finished, and they were heralded by Joshua as being really effective and necessary in this war. In fact, the descendants of Gad, even into the united monarchy with David, and later on, they're shown to be exceptional warriors. And so Joshua was like, you guys did awesome. Thank you. And anyhow, they say when they're going back over, we erected this witness so that future generations would not, and specifically they're talking to the 9.5, they're saying that your children would not look at our children and say of them that they had nothing to do with the conquest of Israel. And so they're already anticipating.
Because originally they didn't want to.
Well, yeah, but also that because they recognize that being across the Jordan River has pushed them outside of, and the 9.5 use a specific word, it's the Lord's land, right? They recognize they're settling outside of the promised land. It's not like the promised land gets like a section tacked onto it.
Right. There's no annex.
Yeah, there's no, right, exactly. So they're already forecasting this problem, which is that these future generations won't recognize, won't care that they were a part of it, will reject that truth. And what's funny is that the 9.5, I need to go back just a little bit in the story, but when they still thought that this was a bad altar, before learning this dumb idea for a witness, when they still thought it was a bad altar, they said, look, if your intention was to sacrifice to try and cleanse the land that you're going into because you feel like it's unclean, right? Language that we understand now.
Sure.
They said, you can actually come back and still settle in the promised land. And so they're like, it's not too late. Like, you can still come back over here and be a part of what we have going on. And one other thing to that, it just echoes something. We didn't go over this on Sunday, but when Moses gives them their compromise, if they failed to live up to what they were supposed to do, meaning send over their troops, right? Of which they met kind of the bare minimum. But if they had just failed to do that at all, the consequence was that they couldn't settle in their inheritance and they would settle in the promised land. So failing to do what they wanted to do, it's like God said, like, there's this flow chart, and it's like, if you fail, you come back around to the beginning and you follow my plan.
Right.
And so it's like, I don't know if we didn't cover that because it doesn't change our narrative at all, but it just undergirds sort of
No, but even while we were reading the part that we did, I was wondering, like, what if instead of what they ended up doing, what if they had just stopped and said, you know what? This went pretty well. Maybe we should just turn back. We should invite our families to come over.
Yeah.
There's plenty of land.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to work that out. Unfortunately, they didn't.
Yeah, it's kind of the unanswered question, really, is what could have happened if they didn't do this. Yeah. So it's I just found it so fascinating that all along the way they're like, you can still come and settle here, and they're like, no thanks. We'll stay outside. And this thing in Joshua 22. And then there's I won't, bore you with the details, but suffice to say, in Numbers 32, when they list out all the cities that they want, most of the time, that specifically when Heshbon and Medeba are mentioned, which are two of the cities, they're almost always referred to as being under Moabite or Ammonite control. And so it's like all these places that they say that they want, as you keep going throughout the Bible, if you kind of track with them, it's like they are rarely, if ever, referred to outside of the context of war. So they were just always battling.
But this last part of this conversation made me think of people even like myself, who you could say I was an East Manasseh person for part of my life.
Sure,
like I knew because I had been raised in a Christian home that these were the things that I should have been doing and the things I should have been holding dear. Yeah. But yet I rebelled. And for people who are in that same worldly grip, I mean, it's just hard to turn away from it.
Yeah, and I think
if everyone around you is doing the same thing.
Right. And I think what I tried to emphasize this, but sometimes, and I've certainly done this, when we talk about rebellion, especially in the course of Numbers, it's often very black and white. It's like, God said do this, they complained and said he was a liar and a murderer, and they rebelled. And you're like, okay, well that, makes sense. Spade a spade. It's a rebellion. But what's so fascinating about Numbers 32 is you can definitely understand from sort of just a human point of view, like what was going through the minds of these warriors, right? And I mentioned it in the sermon, but just like what they were desiring for their families was not a bad thing. But it superseded the priorities that God had called them to, and ultimately became a bad thing because of where they had placed it in terms of their efforts and their heart and their just their desires. And so I think that that's also true sometimes when we talk about people who are in rebellion against God. it becomes a shade of gray because sometimes they are doing perfectly good things, but they have placed them above God and completely pushed him out of the picture or made him such a small sliver of the pie, that they can say that they're still attached.
The motivation matters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, Teresa, when you're talking about that, having a part of your life that was an East Manassas life, that's a good term to use, I guess, in this sermon. I think that even if you can't point to a part of your life that you would say that was the lifestyle I was living, anything that we hold on to that is not within God's will or hold on, as Connor just said, too tightly, can become that and can become rebellion. And I don't think a lot of times we see it as serious as that. And I thought that, I didn't write the verse down, but in Numbers 32, when he's talking about God's enemies, his enemies, that really hit me because I'm like, holding on to something that you want more than what God wants for your life would be, you may not get a blessing of God because you're holding on to something that you want for yourself, but also you're not allowing God to use your life, and those are his enemies. Those are his goals. There's plans that God has that he wants us to participate in, and I think a lot of times I don't think that through with if I'm being selfish or holding on to something that it's not like sometimes I don't think that through, like maybe it's not just for me. Maybe God has something for my life that is his for him, not just for me. That sounds really bad, but
so that transitions nicely to this thing I wanted to ask about.
Yeah.
So I made notes of that slide that you showed that had why staying on the east side of the Jordan was a bad idea. Yeah. And you had 4 points. Yeah. And one was that it undermines Israel's unity, it fractures their military, it discourages the other tribes, and it angers God by their rebellion. Yeah. And so I thought about that for a minute. I thought, okay, how does this work today as kind of a litmus test? Yeah. And I think I got one, but I want to see what you guys think. Yeah. So other unbiblical movements, ideas or things that we choose to do, not participating in the Great Commission is an example, a great example that you gave, undermines church unity rather than Israel's unity. Mm-hmm. It fractures the body of Christ rather than fractures the military, discourages other believers and seekers and even people who just aren't yet, maybe they're even opposed to Christianity because they see so much of this kind of disunity. And then same one, angers God by rebellion, which is good to think about in any case. Is that a good test for us when we're thinking about how we're, whether it's some kind of, I don't know if it's some kind of a special brand of Christian nationalism, or if it's either doing things not biblical or not doing things that are biblical. Both sides of that. Is that a decent place to start?
Yeah, I think I would probably consider it first from the perspective of things that God has called us to do, and so that's where the Great Commission comes in. You hit on this sermon. I probably worked on the ending more than any other. I was up pretty late Saturday because there was a whole version of this where the church was actually the application at the end instead of the Great Commission. And the reason why I didn't go with that is because, I think the Great Commission fits, and I still think that's true application. And but it identifies more with the mission and the language of being on mission. But the one thing that is missing from the Great Commission and the context that we described is that the church is the vehicle, the means that God has established in our world now, that the Great Commission is supposed to flow through, right? And so it is not a wholly individual effort, but it is supposed to be people who are a body of believers, a church, that is then on mission sort of for the Great Commission, right?
Back to the group project concept that you brought up at the beginning.
The reason I didn't do that is because I felt like I needed to, it was too much of a statement to just say that the church is now Israel. That's I know some people don't care. That's a pretty loaded concept. that has to do with like some stuff that Jason and I encountered at ETS, but like dispensational and covenantal theology and different things like that. And if I was doing it the right way, I should probably have a couple verses to state that that's the case. But regardless, it's true nevertheless. And so I just didn't want to distract from the main point by going through like, okay, now Israel is the church and therefore as a part of the church. But to your point, Teresa, absolutely. Like when we are not participating in the Great Commission, what we're discouraging is the people in our church community. We're not just discouraging somebody in like, the UK or something, like somebody across the pond. Like we're discouraging somebody in our backyard.
Right.
And when we break that unity, when we don't engage with the church, all of those are things that definitely apply. In fact, I had the slide that is the great error of Israel, and then for us, originally that was 2 great errors, and the second great error was that Israel, Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh, that they wanted the benefits of of belonging to believers, and I'm using a New Testament term there, but they wanted the benefits of belonging to believers without putting forth the effort.
Oh. Yeah.
And because that's definitely what they do. They're like, hey, we're a part of Israel, especially beforehand. They're like, you look at their request and it's like, we're Israel, we're doing this, we're going to settle outside the promised land, but we want all the benefits. Even the monument, the altar that I mentioned is showing like, hey, we're exiting and we're not going to be a part of your real national identity anymore, but we still want to be included generations
cake
from
and eat
now.
It too.
We want to be included generations from now as a listing of the tribes. And
wow.
That was another one that got honestly just cut for time because I wanted to really hone in on the first error. But that's true for us. Like there are some people, and part of the reason I cut is because I didn't know a great way to say it with grace. But there are just some people who have expectations of, I would just say like Topeka Bible Church, but they put forth very little of themselves into our church community, and then question why they aren't getting a 7-fold return.
Right.
And that's sometimes a really hard conversation. Why is the church not supporting me in this way? And it's like, well, I mean, it's not necessarily intentional, but you haven't really been a part of the church. Or sometimes there are people who say that they belong to TBC and that it's their home church, and we haven't seen them here for a year.
Yeah.
And so I say those things not to condemn, but as a way of understanding that was part of the difficulty with the decision. And when Moses says, like, man, do you really think that your brothers are going to go to war while you just sit here? A part of church, a significant part of church, is that we are here for, this is Hebrews, right? But that we're supposed to encourage each other towards love and good deeds. And that's the reason the writer of Hebrews says you're not supposed to forsake meeting together, is because you have a duty every single time you come to church that you are supposed to be encouraging and uplifting and supporting your brothers and sisters in Christ, because what you're doing the other, 6 days of the week, essentially, is that you're going out into the world. And you are a part of the Great Commission.
Yeah, and not only just encouraging and teaching your brothers and sisters, putting yourself in a community where you're being taught and corrected as well. And this part that some of us, it's hard sometimes to do that.
Yeah. Church it's a whole thing. It's not just a place where somebody listens to me speak.
It can't be a consumer culture. We can consume, but we have to be active participants.
Yeah.
I'm biting my tongue to not make a statement about restaurants and buffets right now. No, but seriously, we can't just show up and receive. There are seasons of our lives when that is what we need, but that can't be what we do all the time.
Yes. Yeah. I think you have to have it begins with having a greater understanding of what being a part of a church represents. Because there are a lot of people who, I don't blame them, because they were raised to think that being a part of a church means like the place you show up to you dress up, show up to, and then you go out to eat afterwards, and then that's kind of like your engagement.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, it's supposed to be a much bigger thing.
Yeah.
I mean, Jason knows this when Camp Catapult is coming up, but like the reason 460 kids are going to hear the gospel is not because Jason cloned himself, but it's because some people took off a week of work.
Yes.
A lot of people took vacation time
to
week
do it.
to do that.
Yeah. Because they're saying, hey, I understand that this is more important. And just to circle back now, I think to the great truth though that I shared, which is, not that volunteering for Camp Catapult is the be all end all of being a part of a church, but it's a great illustration because those people are saying, hey, we're going to commit to something. We're going to participate in it. And we recognize that using a week of vacation to share the gospel with a couple hundred sweaty small kids is working towards something that is way better than what I could get right now. And it might not be as fun as a week of vacation, and it's not demonstrative that every person has to give up a week of vacation. Sure. But it's like I said, it's a good illustration of somebody saying, hey, I understand that we're working towards something bigger. Mm-hmm. And that, if people can grasp that church is about something bigger than yourself. It's not the individual, it's the corporate in the sense of the body, corpus as a Latin word, like the body of Christ, that we are all working towards this thing together with the same goal and the same heart and trying to encourage one another along the way. That builds it up to, well, frankly, where it's supposed to be, but also to this place where you're like, okay, I understand that this thing should have my input and it's not all about output, what I'm getting from it. So I don't think the 2.5 tribes fully understood that.
I don't know if they did. Anything else, gentlemen?
We got 1 week left in Numbers.
Wow.
1 week left. We'll do the cities of refuge will be our final one.
Nice.
So,
very good. Looking forward to that. It's been a great series. And well, thank you for joining us. If you have thoughts, comments, questions for our team, or for Connor, anybody, just put them in the comments, and we look forward to reading those and getting back to you. Have a great week.
See you at Golden Corral.
Thank you for listening to the TBC Extra Podcast. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.
We drop an episode every Wednesday, and on the first Friday of each month, we have an extra episode. Extra! With stories, pastoral teaching, interviews, and more.
See you next time, and have a great rest of your week.